Something is off about that photograph. You might not catch it the first time. Most people don't. It is right there in the background of the Cartman living room, visible during a brief scene in the very first episode that aired on August 13th, 1997. A picture frame. Inside that frame is not an animated character. It is a real person. A young blonde woman, photographed in the real world, slipped quietly into a construction paper animated universe without a single line of explanation. The episode moves on. The story moves on. And that photograph sits in the background like a secret nobody bothered to keep. Nobody pointed at it. Nobody asked who she was. Nobody in the episode seems to notice because in the logic of South Park, she has always been there. That woman is Matt Stone's sister. But here's the thing that nobody fully explains. Even now, why is she there? Why was a real photograph of a real person embedded in the animation during the pilot? Was it a joke? An inside reference between two guys who had been close friends since college and were now suddenly the most controversial people on cable television? Was it Matt Stone quietly waving hello to his family from inside a show that the whole country was losing its mind over? Nobody has ever given a direct and satisfying answer, and by the time later seasons rolled around, the show had quietly abandoned the entire practice of embedding real photographs into its animation style. Celebrities who appeared on the show stopped being rendered as photographs. They became animated. The world got cleaner, more consistent. And that strange photograph in the Cartman living room became a piece of pilot episode oddity that thousands of deeply obsessive South Park fans have spent years quietly turning over in their minds. That is the thing about South Park. After 28 seasons and over 300 episodes, the show still has corners you have not fully explored. There are details that were never explained, mysteries that were set up and either resolved years later in ways nobody expected or never resolved at all. There are characters whose backstories remain half-finished. There are running jokes whose origins are stranger than anyone guesses. There are fan theories so carefully constructed and so tightly argued that they feel more coherent than some of the official answers the show has provided. This is a journey through those mysteries, all of them, or as many as we can fit into the time we have together. We are going to move slowly. There is no rush here. If you are lying in bed right now or sitting somewhere quiet or doing something that does not require your full attention, just let this wash over you. We are going to talk about a cartoon made of construction paper for a very long time. And by the end of it, you will look at that show differently. You will notice things you had not noticed before. And some questions, the good ones, the ones that have lived quietly in the back of fan forums and late-night conversations for decades, will never quite get answered. And that is okay. That is part of what makes South Park worth talking about. If you're enjoying this so far, drop a comment below and tell me what time it is where you are and what city you're watching from. I genuinely love reading those. And if you haven't subscribed to North Park yet, now is the perfect moment. We do exactly this kind of thing, long, slow, deep dives into the worlds we love, every single week. Section 1. The pilot's secrets and the question of that photograph. Let's stay with the pilot a little longer because there is more to find there than just the photograph. The first episode of South Park, the one called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, aired in the summer of 1997. It was the only episode of the entire series to be animated using actual physical construction paper. Every other episode since then has been created digitally using software designed to replicate the handmade, choppy, flat aesthetic of real paper cut-out animation. But the pilot was the real thing. Trey Parker and Matt Stone cut paper. They glued things together. They used an old camera. There's a rawness to the pilot that later episodes do not have, not because later seasons lost something, but because the tool changed. The look stayed the same, the soul of the thing translated. But that first episode has a texture that is genuinely different if you go back and watch it now. And inside that episode, before the story even properly starts, there are choices that were never fully explained. The photograph of Matt Stone's sister is the most famous of these. Fans on Reddit and in South Park forums discovered it years after the pilot first aired, and when it circulated online, the reaction was this quiet, unsettled fascination. Why is she there? In the context of the scene, it is an establishing shot of the Cartman house. Leanne Cartman, and Eric's perpetually forgiving and deeply complicated mother, is at home, The camera pans across the interior, and there, in the background, is a picture frame that contains a real-world photograph. Stone's sister appears twice in the episode, actually. In one frame, she has all her teeth. In another, she is missing one. South Park fans, being the kind of people who watch the same scenes multiple times while taking notes, caught both appearances. But the photo was never the only mystery lurking in that pilot. There is also the matter of what the original, unaired pilot looked like. Before Comedy Central officially picked up South Park and gave it the contract that would make Trey Parker and Matt Stone very rich and very famous, there was an earlier version of the pilot, an unaired version, and a rougher thing that contained elements that were later changed. In that unaired pilot, the Cartman family was different. Eric Cartman did not live alone with his mother. There was a father, a character who appeared at the dinner table with curly gray hair and a gray mustache, wearing a light blue short-sleeved shirt. There was also a sister. Parker and Stone made the decision early in development, apparently at Comedy Central's direction or influence, to strip the family down. They removed the father. They removed the sister. They reduced the Cartman household to just two people, a mother and her son. And in doing so, they created something that would power one of the most elaborate mystery setups in animated television history. Because once you remove the father, the question becomes unavoidable. Who is Eric Cartman's father? And that question would hang over the show for 13 full years. But we will get to that. First, let us talk about the living room photograph one more time, because I think its strangeness goes deeper than just being a curiosity. In those early seasons of South Park, the show did something it no longer does. It used real photographs of real people embedded within animation, particularly for celebrities. In the Season 1 premiere, when the boys see celebrities on television or encounter famous faces, those faces were sometimes rendered as photographs rather than drawings. Mel Gibson appears as a photograph in early episodes. Ben Affleck appeared the same way for a period. There are a handful of other instances scattered across the first couple of seasons where the production team used real imagery rather than hand-rendered animation to represent specific people. And then, quietly, they stopped doing it. There was no announcement, no creative statement from Parker or Stone about why the practice ended. It simply faded out. The show became more consistently animated. Celebrity appearances started being drawn, not photographed. And the instances where real photographs had been woven into the show became these strange archaeological artifacts of an earlier era. Why did they stop? The most practical explanation is that it created legal complications. Using real photographs of real people without permission, even in an animated context, opens the door to intellectual property concerns. And as the show became larger and more legally visible, the production team would have wanted to be more careful about that kind of thing. The celebrity photograph approach, while funny and dissonant in the way early South Park often was probably the sort of thing that worked when the show was a scrappy cable experiment, but became more complicated as it turned into one of the biggest properties on Comedy Central. But there is another reading of it, one that is more interesting, which is that the crude animation style of South Park already does something dissonant enough on its own. The contrast between the childlike paper cutout aesthetic and the deeply adult content was always the joke. Adding photographic inserts was doubling down on that dissonance, layering real-world intrusions into an already unstable visual universe. Now, by pulling back from that, by committing more fully to the animated world as its own self-contained thing, the show made its world feel more coherent even as the content got stranger. Whatever the reason, those early photograph inclusions remain in the episodes if you watch them. The unaired pilot with its complete Cartman family remains accessible if you know where to find it. And that single image of Matt Stone's sister, in a picture frame on the wall of a cartoon house, remains the oldest and strangest unsolved detail in the show's history. Nobody has ever given a full, satisfying explanation for why it is there. Parker and Stone have mentioned it in commentary and interviews, but have never committed to a single clear answer. It exists the way a lot of South Park's deepest mysteries exist. Acknowledged, grinned about, and never truly resolved. There is something almost right about that. A show built on the premise that nothing is sacred, that everything is fair game, that the creators would never be particularly interested in giving you the comfortable, clean resolution you were hoping for. Of course, the pilot has a photograph that was never explained. Of course, the first frame of the first episode already contains a secret. It was always going to be like this. South Park was always going to be the kind of show that hides things in plain sight and then looks over its shoulder at you and grins. There is also the question of the unaired pilot sister. In the version that preceded the official premiere, Eric Cartman had a sister. She appeared at the dinner table alongside the father in that brief domestic scene. Like the father, she was cut before the show entered production. She simply ceased to exist in the canonical version of Cartman's world. But here's the strange thing. In the unaired pilot, both the father and the sister are present but silent. They sit at the table. They do not speak. They do not move in ways that give them personality or motive. They are props, almost. Furniture that makes the household look like a conventional family unit before that conventional unit was stripped away. Parker and Stone took one look at a normal family structure for their main character and decided that a boy alone with a deeply permissive single mother was funnier, stranger, and more generative than anything a complete family could provide. That decision, made before the show aired, and then retroactively visible in the unaired pilot, that explains something fundamental about what South Park was always going to be. The deliberate removal of the father as a presence in the Cartman household is not just a backstory choice. It is the engine of one of the show's most enduring and eventually most heartbreaking narrative threads. You cannot have the 13-year mystery of who Cartman's father is without first having removed the father from the picture entirely. The mystery required the absence, and the absence required a conscious, creative decision to strip the family down to something more uncomfortable, more unresolved, more interesting. The unaired pilot with its complete Cartman family is a glimpse of a South Park that did not happen. A version of the show where the most important question about its main character was never asked because it never needed to be. The version that aired chose the question over the answer and spent the next decade and a half making you glad it did. Let's go a little deeper. The town of South Park, Colorado is a real place. Not in the way the show depicts it, obviously, but a town called South Park exists as a valley in Park County, Colorado, roughly 90 minutes southwest of Denver. Trey Parker grew up in Conifer, Colorado. Matt Stone grew up in Littleton, Colorado. They met as students at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and the sensibility of South Park the show, the small mountain town aesthetic, the particular flavor of Colorado community life, the specific kind of American insularity that makes the setting work, comes from their actual childhoods. The show is not set in a made-up universe. It is set in a version of the world these two men grew up in. Much that matters because some of the show's deepest mysteries are autobiographical mysteries. Questions about what the show is really about often have answers that trace back to something real. We will spend a lot of time on those connections tonight. But before we move on from the pilot, there is one last detail worth pausing on. In the original construction paper pilot, before the transition to digital animation, there is a quality to the movement that is physically different from everything that came after. The paper cuts are imprecise. The edges have texture. When characters turn, you can see the layering of the physical materials underneath them. In the digital versions, the show perfectly replicates the look of construction paper. But it replicates it too well. It is clean where the original was rough. It is consistent where the original was wobbly. The pilot is the only place where you can see what the show might have been if it had stayed physically made. And there is something haunting about that. Because the show that became one of the most successful animated properties in television history started as two college friends cutting paper and gluing it together. Before the deals, before the lawyers, before the controversies, before the censorship battles and the death threats and the White House press releases, it was just paper and glue and a camera. That is not a mystery exactly, but it feels like the beginning of one. Section 2. The Cartman's Father Saga, a mystery that took 13 years. If you ask a South Park fan to name the show's greatest long-form mystery, most of them will give you the same answer without hesitating. So who is Cartman's father? It is one of the few examples in animated television history where a mystery introduced in a season finale was not resolved until 14 years later. It is layered, complicated, darkly ironic, and the resolution, when it finally came, retroactively recontextualized one of the most beloved episodes the show had ever produced. Everything about it is a case study in how South Park operates at its most characteristically maddening. To understand the full weight of it, you have to start at the beginning. The first season of South Park ended in 1997 with an episode called Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut. The premise is exactly what the title suggests. Cartman wants to know who his father is, and the investigation reveals that Leanne Cartman, his mother, has slept with a remarkable number of men in South Park. The list of potential fathers includes most of the adult male characters from the show's first season. And in one of those early South Park jokes that functions both as absurdist humor and as a genuine plot element, the entire roster of the 1989 Denver Broncos. Dr. Alphonse Mephisto, the local scientist who is based loosely on Marlon Brando's character from The Island of Dr. Moreau, runs a DNA test. The results come in. He is about to reveal the truth. And then the season ends. A title card tells viewers to tune in 4 weeks later for the resolution. This was already an unusual creative decision in 1997. Television cliffhangers were common, but South Park was a cartoon. Animated shows did not typically operate this way. They did not build season-ending mysteries. They did not ask audiences to sit with unresolved questions for weeks. The show had been running for less than a year, and it was already doing something structurally different from almost every other animated property on television. Then April Fool's Day, 1998 arrived. The Season 2 premiere was supposed to resolve the cliffhanger. Fans had been waiting for 4 weeks. Ratings had been climbing, the show was becoming a genuine cultural phenomenon, and this resolution was supposed to be the payoff. Comedy Central was building promotional material around it. People were actually talking about it, and instead of answering the question, the episode that aired was not about Cartman or his father at all. It was called Terrence and Phillip in Not Without My Anus. And it was exactly what that title described. A full 22-minute episode devoted entirely to Terrence and Phillip, the Canadian flatulence-based comedy duo who existed as a show within the show. The episode involved Saddam Hussein attempting to take over Canada. There was no Stan, no Kyle, no Cartman, no Kenny, no answer about the father. Just farts. Comedy Central received over 2,000 angry emails within a week. Fans were genuinely furious. Some left the show and never came back. Matt Stone's response to the backlash, delivered through Entertainment and Weekly, has become one of the most quoted lines in South Park history. His basic position was that if you are that upset about not knowing who a construction paper kid's father is, something has gone wrong in your relationship with the television show. This was, of course, entirely deliberate. The prank was signed off on by the network. It was Trey and Matt doing what they always do, which is identifying exactly the thing their audience wants most and refusing to give it to them until the moment is right. The actual resolution, when it finally aired 3 weeks later on April 22, 1998, pulled an 8.2 rating. At the time, that was the highest-rated non-sports show in the history of basic cable. The prank had not cost them their audience, it had made the audience hungrier. And the answer it provided was technically an answer, but not the whole truth. Dr. Mephisto gathered everyone and announced that Leanne Cartman was, in fact, a hermaphrodite. She was both Cartman's mother and his father. She had gone to the drunken barn dance years ago, slept with a number of people, and had somehow fathered Eric herself through a biological mechanism the show did not dwell on too carefully. The crowd accepted this. Eric accepted this. After considerable distress. The mystery was closed. Except it was not closed. Not really. Years passed. Cartman grew more complex as a character. The show became sharper and stranger. In Season 5, in the summer of 2001, an episode aired that appeared to be a standalone revenge story about a kid named Scott Tenorman who had tricked Cartman into buying his pubic hair for $10. Cartman plotted elaborate revenge. Multiple schemes failed. The episode was building toward what seemed like a conventional resolution, the kind where the bully gets his comeuppance and the audience gets to feel satisfied. And then the finale of Scott Tenorman Must Die arrived. In the episode's climax, it is revealed that Cartman had arranged for Scott Tenorman's parents to be shot dead by a farmer. He had their bodies ground into chili, and he served that chili to Scott at a cook-off. Scott ate his parents, And then Cartman licked Scott's tears of grief while Radiohead, whom Scott had been promised would appear at the event, watched. This episode has a 9.6 rating on IMDb. It is widely considered one of the greatest episodes the show ever produced, and one of the most disturbing things that has ever appeared in any animated format. It fundamentally redefined Cartman as a character. He was no longer just a bratty, bigoted child. He was capable of something genuinely monstrous, something premeditated and cold and horrifyingly complete. What nobody knew in 2001 was that Scott Tenorman's parents, the people Cartman had just had killed and served as chili, were going to matter enormously 9 years later. The 200th episode arrived in the spring of 2010, which Parker and Stone decided to celebrate the milestone by bringing back every celebrity the show had ever offended. The plot involves Tom Cruise assembling a class action lawsuit against the town. Muhammad is sought out because he apparently possesses the unique superpower of never being ridiculed. In the course of the episode, Scott Tenorman reappears, and he has done some research. It turns out the hermaphrodite revelation from Season 2 was a lie. The town had covered up the truth about Cartman's biological father in order to protect the Denver Broncos during what had been a very good season for the team. Jack Tenorman, Scott's father, the man Cartman had orchestrated the death of in Season 5, had slept with Leanne at the drunken barn dance years ago. He had been the right tackle for the 1989 Denver Broncos. He was, in fact, Eric Cartman's biological father. The implications of this are devastating in a very quiet way. Cartman had always wanted to know who his father was. He had spent his entire life orbiting that question, and the answer was someone he had already killed. Not only had he killed his own father, he had cooked him into a meal and fed him to his half-brother as revenge for a minor social embarrassment involving pubic hair. The revenge that had defined him, the act that had turned him from a loud child into something genuinely terrifying, had been directed at his own family without his knowledge. Scott Tenorman reveals this to Cartman in episode 201. Cartman's reaction is one of the most unusual moments the show has ever produced. He does not rage, he does not immediately scheme. Yet he uses the ginger cover as an excuse to hide the fact that what he is actually feeling is grief. He cries briefly for the father he never got to know and the father he had already destroyed. The 13-year gap between the introduction of the mystery and its resolution is remarkable in itself. But what makes the Cartman's father saga genuinely extraordinary is the way its resolution is inseparable from Scott Tenorman must die. Parker and Stone did not plan this connection from the beginning. They have said in interviews that the father reveal in 200 and 201 grew from a creative process of looking backward through the show's history and finding connections. When they realized that Scott's father could retroactively become Cartman's father, and that this meant Cartman had unknowingly killed his own parent in one of the show's most beloved episodes, they understood they had found something irreplaceable. It is the kind of storytelling where the puzzle piece you did not know was missing snaps into place, and suddenly everything you thought you understood about a particular episode shifts slightly sideways. Go back and watch Scott Tenorman Must Die Knowing What You Know Now. Watch Cartman arrange the death of the Tenormans. Watch the moment of revelation. Notice what it feels like when you understand that Cartman is grieving over parents while eating the father he would eventually learn was also his own. There is an additional layer here that fans sometimes miss, which is the specific cruelty of the comedy in that original episode. Cartman arranged for Scott's parents to be shot by a farmer by convincing the farmer that they were pony killers. The elaborate absurdism of that mechanism, the specific insanity of engineering two deaths by convincing someone that these particular people were dangerous to ponies, lands differently when you know that one of those deaths was also, in a sense, fratricide. Cartman was protecting himself from a social humiliation by eliminating someone's family, and the collateral damage included his own lineage. The comedy of the original episode is darkened retroactively. The outrageous plot, so funny in its maximalist excess, becomes something queasy when you know what was actually lost. There is a word for that kind of feeling, for the specific emotional weight of hindsight applied to something that cannot be changed. South Park earned it. Every year of the mystery, every troll move and April Fool's prank and long silence on the subject was worth what it eventually produced. The unresolved note inside all of this, the question that still quietly exists, is whether Jack Tenorman ever knew about Cartman. The wiki and the show suggest it was not known whether Jack was aware of the pregnancy resulting from his night at the drunken barn dance. Leanne appears to have known because the town knew and covered it up, but whether Jack himself had any awareness of Cartman's existence was never addressed. He died before the question could be asked. Cartman killed him before they could ever meet. That gap, that small, unreachable question, is one of the mysteries that was set up by the resolution and will probably never be fully answered. Did Jack Tennerman know he had a son? Would it have mattered to either of them if he had? These are the kind of questions that sit quietly in the corners of the story, not loud enough to demand attention, but present enough that you find yourself thinking about them when you lie still in the dark. Section 3. Kenny McCormick and the Curse That Will Not Let Him Die. There are very few comedic premises in television history that have lasted as long or traveled as far as Kenny McCormick dying. For the first 5 seasons of South Park, Kenny died in almost every single episode. The methods were extraordinarily varied: crushed by a satellite, eaten by a mutant turkey, killed by a giant flying robot, eviscerated, burned, drowned, frozen, blown up, stabbed. The creativity of Kenny's deaths became its own kind of running game for the writing staff, a challenge to find new and increasingly absurd methods of ending a child's life for comedic purposes, and then bring him back the following week as if nothing had happened. Stan Marsh would always say the same thing. Kyle would always say the same thing. And then Kenny would be there again at the bus stop on Wednesday morning, orange parka pulled tight, words muffled into incoherence, the world having moved on without memory. For a very long time, there was no explanation for this. It was simply a joke. Kenny died. Kenny came back. Nobody remembered. The show did not ask you to interrogate it, and most viewers, including the deeply dedicated ones, accepted the gag as a gag and did not push further. Then, in Season 3, Episode 14, i.e. which aired in November of 1999, an episode called Cartman Joins NAMBLA provided the first tiny fragment of an answer. In the episode, Kenny dies, as he does, and the McCormick family is shown at home afterward. Mrs. McCormick becomes pregnant. She gives birth almost immediately. The baby is wearing an orange parka. Mr. McCormick, looking at the new infant, says something like, "God, this must be the 50th time this has happened." His wife corrects him, 52nd. So the show acknowledged the mechanism but did not explain it. Kenny dies. His mother gives birth to a new Kenny. The new Kenny rapidly grows back to the age at which the previous Kenny died. Nobody else seems to remember. The cycle continues. The question of why this happened sat unanswered for another 11 years. In 2009, during Season 13, Episode 2, the superhero character Mysterion was introduced. This is a masked vigilante, clearly a child based on the proportions and voice, operating in South Park in a very dark, very seriously played version of the superhero genre. The character's identity was deliberately concealed. The show animated Mysterion in a way that made it genuinely difficult to tell who was under the mask. The voice was distorted. The physical proportions could have belonged to several of the regular child characters. Parker and Stone claimed at various points that Mysterion's identity had not even been decided internally. They described the character as a mystery for the audience to debate, citing a similar creative impulse to the Cartman's father question. Who is Mysterion became a significant fan discussion point. Theories circulated extensively, placing the identity variously as Kyle, Craig, Clyde, or Stan. Kenny was on the list, but was not considered the obvious answer. Then, in Season 14, Episodes 14 through 16, the Coon and Friends trilogy arrived. And in Mysterion Rises, the character unmasked himself to his friends. It was Kenny. Not only was it Kenny, but the Mysterion episodes gave Kenny the most substantial character work he had ever received in the history of the series. Suddenly, Kenny had interiority. He had a perspective on his own situation that was not played for laughs. He was angry. He was exhausted. He was desperately trying to understand something about himself that nobody else could help him with. Mysterion's superpower, Kenny explained to his friends, was that he could not stay dead. He died repeatedly and woke up again in his bed. that his friends never remembered it happening. Nobody around him acknowledged the deaths. He was the only one who carried the memories forward. He had killed himself in front of people to prove it, and they were horrified in the moment and forgot completely by the next morning. The episode treated this as a curse rather than a gift. Kenny, as Mysterion, described his immortality in a way that was genuinely, quietly sorrowful. He did not experience the forgetting. He carried everything, every death, every moment of physical trauma, every loss. And the people closest to him moved on without it, the way you move on from a dream the morning after, as if none of it had been real. There was also, woven into the Coon and Friends mythology, a hint at the source of the curse. In the third episode of the trilogy, during a confrontation involving Cthulhu and the supernatural cosmology that the show had assembled for these episodes, Kenny's mother says something that she mutters quietly to herself as she goes back to bed after another midnight delivery of a new infant Kenny. She says something like, "We should never have gone to those stupid cult meetings. The cult of Cthulhu." Kenny's parents attended meetings. There was a pact made, or a curse incurred, or a connection established between Kenny McCormick and the elder gods of H.P. Lovecraft's mythology. And the result was that Kenny could not stay dead. Every death brought him back. Every death was remembered only by him. This explanation is partial and deliberately incomplete. The show never specifies exactly what the cult meetings involved, and it does not clarify whether the McCormick parents understood what they were agreeing to, or whether Kenny's condition is the result of an intentional choice by them, or an accidental consequence of proximity to something beyond their understanding. The hint is dropped and never fully developed. The mythology sits there the way a lot of South Park's deepest lore sits, half visible and never quite resolved. Fans have extended this in directions the show has never officially confirmed. One of the most persistent theories involves Cartman's unique awareness of Kenny's deaths. In the early seasons, and in scattered moments through the middle and later seasons, Cartman displays an awareness of Kenny's pattern that Stan and Kyle do not share. He has referenced it directly in episodes. He has pointed out to other characters that Kenny dies constantly. He remembers it in contexts where everyone else has forgotten. The theory that attempts to explain this connects to two specific plot points. The first is from Season 3 in an episode called Succubus, where Cartman gets an eye transplant using Kenny's actual eyes from his severed head. The second is from Season 6 during the period when Kenny was officially written off the show, where Cartman accidentally drinks Kenny's ashes mixed into a solution, and Kenny's soul briefly inhabits Cartman's body. Both of these events created a direct physical and metaphysical connection between the two characters, and the theory holds that this connection granted Cartman some portion of Kenny's perspective on reality, including the ability to remember what others forget. But Parker and Stone have never confirmed this. It is fan construction, built from pieces the show provided without explicit intent. But the architecture of it is coherent enough and fits the established details well enough that it lives in that gray zone between theory and something close to unofficial truth. What was officially provided in the post-COVID special of 2021, set 40 years in the future, is the one instance where Kenny died as an adult and the resurrection mechanism failed. The show implies clearly that the cycle requires Kenny's mother to give birth to a new infant, and that this process continues as long as she is biologically able to do so. In the future of post-COVID, she is decades too old. Kenny, in adulthood, dies in a time travel accident related to the COVID-19 pandemic and does not come back. But there is something genuinely moving about that when you sit with it. Kenny McCormick, the child in the orange parka who died hundreds of times and came back hundreds of times, who carried the weight of every death that his friends forgot, who was cursed by something his parents stumbled into at a cult meeting and never fully understood, who grew up to become a celebrated scientist trying to save the world, died in a future laboratory while his mother was too old to bring him back. The curse did not last forever. It only lasted a childhood. Whether that makes it better or worse is a question the show leaves entirely to the viewer. Section 4, The Hidden Visitors. Something is watching every episode. Turn down the lights a little more. That's because this section is about something that has been present in South Park since the very first episode and has almost certainly appeared in one that you watched recently without noticing. It is not a character with a name. It is not a plot line that was ever officially resolved. It is a presence, or maybe a game, or maybe something in between the two, and it has been running continuously for almost 3 decades. In the pilot episode, Cartman gets an anal probe. The premise involves Cartman having been abducted by alien visitors and subjected to exactly the procedure the title describes. The aliens in question are drawn in a specific style. They are small and gray and thin, with large heads and dark almond-shaped eyes. They are rendered in the flat, simple construction paper aesthetic of early South Park, but they are identifiable. And after the pilot story concluded, they did not go away. They stayed. Not in any plotline, not in any dialogue, not as characters with names or motivations or storylines of their own. They simply persisted in the background of the show, visible in the corner of scenes, tucked behind furniture, embedded in crowd sequences, hidden on signs, baptized, or posters, or in the pixel-level detail of environmental art. One could be lurking in almost any episode, almost any scene if you know to look for them. They have come to be called the Visitors, and finding them in episodes has been an underground fan hobby for as long as the show has existed. The mythology around the Visitors, to the extent that any mythology exists, is simultaneously very small and very interesting. Within the show's fiction, within the Yasa, the alien abduction of the pilot is never followed up on in any complete or coherent way. The Visitors appear, they abduct, they perform their examination on Cartman, and then the show moves on, and the aliens become background decoration, haunting the edges of the South Park world without ever fully entering it. Comedy Central ran a Find the Hidden Alien contest during the first 7 episodes of Season 12. That tells you something about the status of the visitors within the show's public identity. They were acknowledged, even celebrated as a piece of the show's texture. But they were never explained. Their presence in the pilot was never connected to a larger narrative. Why were they there in the first place? What did they want? Why do they continue appearing in the background of episodes that have nothing to do with alien abduction? These questions remain genuinely open. Parker and Stone have acknowledged the visitor gag in interviews without providing deep answers. The most straightforward interpretation is that it started as a pure production in-joke. 2 guys hiding tiny aliens in their show for the amusement of themselves and whatever small audience might be paying close enough attention to find them. And then the audience found them, and the hiding became more deliberate. And now it is one of the oldest and most consistent Easter eggs in animated television history. But the unsatisfying quality of that explanation is that it does not account for the pilot's actual story. The visitors in the pilot are not background decoration. They are the antagonists of the episode. They abduct Cartman. They perform experiments. They seem to have a purpose and a plan, even if that plan is never explored in depth. The probe itself fires a satellite beam into the sky to communicate with another ship, and the episode ends without full resolution of the alien storyline. Cartman is returned. The aliens have what they came for, and they recede into the margins. Were the visitors always intended to be a recurring presence? Was there a larger story planned for them that was abandoned as the show found its footing in other directions? Were they ever going to become more than background detail? Nobody knows. The fact that they keep appearing decade after decade, episode after episode in the margins of a show that has otherwise constantly reinvented itself, and suggests either a deep creative commitment to a joke that was never meant to be explained, or the fossil of a story that was abandoned before it ever fully took shape. Some fans have proposed that the visitors represent something about the nature of South Park as a universe. The idea, roughly, is that the presence of aliens watching from the edges of every episode is a visual metaphor for the show's own self-awareness, the sense that the events of South Park are being observed by something outside the normal order of things. The visitors are an audience proxy, watching the construction paper children navigate their impossible situations from a position of cosmic detachment. That reading is probably reading more into it than Parker and Stone ever intended, but it has a poetic quality that is hard to fully dismiss. What is not debatable is that the visitors are there. They have been there since the beginning. They will presumably continue being there until the show ends, and the total number of episodes in which they can be found, tucked into backgrounds and hidden in frames, represents thousands of hours of careful animation choices that have never been explained and probably never will be. There is also a connected curiosity. According to the South Park Studios official FAQ, the number of episodes in which a visitor appears is not actually every episode, despite what the popular myth claims. Early statements from the production side suggested it was close to half of episodes, not all of them, though the percentage has never been definitively established. A 2016 piece from a journalist who went through the show systematically found that the every episode claim is an overstatement. But the frequency is high enough and the hiding skilled enough to make finding them a genuine challenge rather than a trivial one. The gap between the myth that there is always an alien in every episode and the reality that there might not be is itself a small South Park mystery. Even the rules of the game are not entirely clear. Even the thing you are looking for does not have a fully defined set of parameters, which is honestly very on brand. Section 5. Mr. Hat. What was that thing actually? Let's talk about the puppet. Mr. Herbert Garrison, 4th grade teacher at South Park Elementary, was one of the show's most consistently strange and interesting adult characters across the first decade of the series. His arc took him through profound changes in identity, sexuality, and social positioning over the years. He was a repressed gay man who did not know he was gay, and then a man who came out, and then a woman who had gender confirmation surgery, and then a woman who missed being a man, and then a man again, and eventually, in the show's satirical take on recent American politics, a Trump analog who became president of the United States. He is genuinely one of the most complexly rendered characters in the show's history when you trace that arc across 20 years. But before all of that, in the earliest seasons, Garrison was almost always accompanied by Mr. Hat. Mr. Hat was a hand puppet, or more precisely, he looked like a hand puppet, a small figure with a beard and a distinctive red top hat, perched on Garrison's left hand and participating in classroom lessons in a way that ranged from inappropriate to bizarre. Mr. Hat said the things Garrison could not say directly. Mr. Hat expressed views that Garrison claimed not to hold. Mr. Hat was, according to the school's psychologist in Season 3, a projection of Garrison's closeted homosexuality, the part of himself he had not yet been able to acknowledge in public. That was the official, in-show, psychological explanation for Mr. Hat. And as an explanation, it works, more or less, within the normal rules of the South Park universe. A repressed man uses a puppet to express things he cannot own directly. The puppet is a psychological coping mechanism. The therapy helps Garrison accept his identity without Mr. Hat, and by the end of the early seasons, Mr. Hat fades out. His last regular appearance was in 2002. But here is where the puppet's presence in the show stops making psychological sense. There are multiple occasions, particularly in seasons 1 through 3, where Mr. Hat does things that Garrison cannot have facilitated. In one instance, Mr. Hat appears in a sauna with football player Brett Favre, having traveled there independently of Garrison. There is no explanation for how the puppet got to a sauna or why it was there. In another storyline, when Garrison briefly replaced Mr. Hat with a different puppet named Mr. Twig, a literal twig with a small shirt on it, Mr. Hat went on his own to attend a Ku Klux Klan meeting, without Garrison's hand, moving through the world autonomously, operating with apparent agency. Mr. Hat also tried on multiple occasions to kill Mr. Twig. This was presented with a degree of seriousness that the show could have played as pure absurdism, but it was not entirely played that way. Mr. Hat's campaign against Mr. Twig felt deliberate and purposeful, as if the puppet had genuine motivations and genuine grievances. At one point, Garrison was in a prison cell. Mr. Hat helped him escape. But the logistics of a hand puppet facilitating a prison break without the man whose hand it usually occupies were never addressed. It just happened. Mr. Hat engineered the escape. And the show moved on. What is Mr. Hat? The psychological explanation that he is Garrison's repressed alter ego cannot account for a puppet that moves through the world independently, attends meetings, forms plans, and causes physical events to occur in Garrison's absence. Something else is going on. Something the show introduced and never resolved. The most interesting fan readings of Mr. Hat tend to involve the supernatural infrastructure that runs underneath the South Park universe. The show has always had one. Satan is a recurring character who holds parties in hell and has complicated romantic relationships. Cthulhu is real and can be summoned. Kenny's immortality is linked to cosmic horror mythology. The town of South Park regularly intersects with forces that exist outside the ordinary rules of physics and causality. In this context, the idea that Mr. Hat might be a genuinely supernatural entity, something that chose to inhabit the puppet form as a vessel, is not entirely incoherent. Yet it fits within the logic of the world. Another reading is simpler, but no less interesting. Mr. Hat is South Park exerting its fundamental disinterest in continuity and explanation. The show introduced a character, realized that character was more interesting if treated as genuinely autonomous rather than as a projection, and then leaned into the autonomy without ever explaining it. When Mr. Hat attends the clan meeting alone, the joke is funnier if you do not ask how he got there. When Mr. Hat engineers the prison break, the joke depends on simply accepting that this is happening without demanding the mechanics. South Park has always trusted its audience to make the leap. Mr. Hat is an extreme version of that trust. What makes the Mr. Hat situation a true mystery rather than just a running gag? Is that the show itself offered an explanation, the psychological one, and then immediately undermined that explanation by showing the puppet doing things that contradict it. It is as if the writer said, "Here is the official answer," and then followed it by demonstrating that the official answer does not fully account for what is happening. The last meaningful appearance of Mr. Hat came in 2010 during the 200th episode, where his brief reappearance was connected to the Cartman's father revelation. His presence there in one of the show's most significant mythology episodes felt like a nod to early history. But it also did not explain anything about what he was or where he had been for the previous 8 years. There is no resolution to Mr. Hat. The show did not give him one. And he existed in the early seasons as a weird and funny, and sometimes genuinely disturbing presence. And then he faded. And the questions he leaves behind are the kind that the show is constitutionally uninterested in answering. What was Mr. Hat? We do not know. That might be the only honest answer available. Section 6. The real people behind the characters. South Park has always been autobiographical in ways that the show does not always announce directly. Parker and Stone put themselves into the show. Their families went in, their friends went in. People who had wronged them went in, people they admired went in. The town of South Park is, underneath its satirical exaggerations and cartoon violence, a kind of extended confession about the inner lives of two men from Colorado. Some of these connections are well known, others are less so. All of them, when you line them up together, tell a story about the relationship between lived experience and creative expression that is more layered than it might first appear. Start with the most obvious. Stan Marsh is Trey Parker. They share a birthday, October 19th. They look similar when drawn at the same age. Stan's father, Randy Marsh, the geologist who becomes increasingly central to the show's later seasons as a character, defined by his ability to be wrong with complete confidence, was based in significant part on Parker's own father. The family structure of the Marsh household mirrors Parker's family structure. When the show does emotionally sincere episodes about father-son relationships, the material is often coming from somewhere real in Parker's life. Kyle Broflovsky is Matt Stone, same May birthday. Same Jewish heritage, which Kyle carries explicitly and Stone carries as part of his background. The Broflovsky parents, Sheila and Gerald, share first names with Stone's real parents. Kyle's tendency to be the moral center of the group, the character most likely to articulate why something is wrong and why it matters, tracks with the role Stone has often described himself as occupying in relation to Parker's more instinctive creative impulses. Parker is the id. Stone is the conscience. Roughly. The connection between Cartman and a real person is more diffuse and more interesting. Matt Cartman, a high school friend of both Parker and Stone, is cited as one of the inspirations for the character. But Cartman is also explicitly influenced by Archie Bunker from All in the Family. So the television character who expressed bigotry so baldly and so articulately that he became, paradoxically, a vehicle for the show's critique of that bigotry. Parker and Stone have also said, and this is one of the more surprising admissions in their extensive interview history, that they most personally identify with Cartman. The character who is the most irredeemable, the most selfish, the most willing to pursue his own interests at any cost, is also the one his creators feel closest to. Make of that what you will. Now let us go to a mystery that is not a mystery if you know where to look, but that functions as a very specific kind of biographical reveal. Leanne Cartman, Eric's mother, is named after a real woman. Her name was Leanne Adamo, and she was Trey Parker's college fiancée. Approximately 1 month before their scheduled wedding, Bud Parker discovered that she had been unfaithful to him, having an affair with an a cappella singer. The discovery ended the engagement. The pain of it appears to have been significant enough that Parker channeled it into creative work almost immediately. His 1993 film Cannibal the Musical, made while he was still at university, contained a character named Leanne who was represented as a horse that everybody rides, which is about as direct a metaphorical statement about infidelity as you can make. The film was one of the pieces of work that eventually caught the attention of the people who would connect Parker and Stone to Comedy Central. And then, when South Park came into being, Cartman's mother was named Leanne. She was depicted as extraordinarily promiscuous, appearing in adult films, as having an enormous number of sexual partners throughout the town, being characterized repeatedly as what the show's early seasons called a dirty slut. The name itself was a continuation of a joke that had started in a low-budget college film years earlier. The biographical weight of this is both funny and strange. Parker spent years satirizing the name of a woman who had hurt him, embedding her into the mythology of one of the most successful animated shows in television history, ensuring that the name would be associated with fictional promiscuity across millions of households and in hundreds of episodes of television. Whether Leanne Adamo is aware of this or has ever seen the show is not something that has been publicly addressed. The Butters connection is gentler but equally interesting. Leopold Butters Stotch, the show's eternal innocent, the golden-haired child who is perpetually victimized and perpetually returns to kindness anyway, is based loosely on Eric Stoke, one of the show's production directors, and a key member of the creative team since the beginning. Stoke, apparently, was a bit of a goody-goody in the early years of the production. Parker and Stone found this lovably annoying. During the making of the South Park movie in 1999, Stowe and some other staff members left work early to go see The Phantom Menace. This apparently irritated Parker enormously, and according to Stone, it was this specific incident that partly inspired the development of Butters as a more prominent character. The gentle nerd who leaves early for Star Wars and suffers his parents' disappointment becomes, in the show's alchemy, much the purest and most battered soul in South Park. Mr. Garrison's origins and specific real people are less well documented, but Parker has mentioned in commentary that the character drew partially on a British literature professor he had during his university years, as well as on memories of a kindergarten teacher who actually walked around with a hand puppet. The image of an adult educator using a puppet as an extension of his own personality, particularly in ways that seem to express things the adult could not say directly, clearly stuck with Parker long enough to become the foundation for one of the show's most complicated recurring characters. Stan and Kyle being based on their creators means that the show's most emotionally sincere moments often have a direct autobiographical source. The episodes about father-son relationships carry weight because they are partially true. The episodes about friendship and the difficulty of maintaining it carry weight for the same reason. Parker and Stone have been collaborators and close friends for more than 30 years, and South Park is, underneath everything else, a document of that friendship. Its tensions and its pleasures and its occasional cruelties and its deep underlying affection. The show makes fun of everyone, including its creators. The Randy Marsh storyline, where the show's most irresponsible and self-deluding adult character becomes increasingly central to the narrative across the later seasons, is widely understood as Parker writing about his own worst tendencies. Randy is the part of Trey Parker that is a little too confident, a little too certain, and a little too willing to blow up everything in pursuit of the next exciting thing. And the show is relentless about what that personality costs the people around it. That is not a mystery exactly, that is just honesty. But the biographical depth that runs through South Park, the degree to which these characters and their relationships encode real experiences and real people, is something that most casual viewers do not fully appreciate. The show is funnier and stranger and sadder if you know where it came from. Section 7. Tolkien Black. the greatest gaslit retcon in television history. Let's talk about a name. For the first 22 seasons and most of the 23rd of South Park, one of the recurring supporting characters was known as Token Black. The character had been present since the pilot episode. He was the only black student in the boys' class at South Park Elementary, in a school that appeared to be otherwise entirely white. His name was a play on the concept of tokenism, the practice of including a member of a minority group in a predominantly majority group setting for the purposes of surface-level diversity rather than genuine inclusion. The joke was explicit from the character's first speaking role. In an intentional reversal of racial stereotypes, Token and his family were portrayed as the wealthiest family in South Park, with a lawyer father and a chemist mother. The joke was layered and the character was handled with more care than the name alone might suggest, but the name was still the name. Then, in February of 2022, Season 25, Episode 2, titled The Big Fix, aired. And what happened in it remains one of the most audacious creative moves in the show's long history. The episode begins with Randy Marsh in a storyline about diversity and marijuana farming, inviting Token and his family over for dinner. During the meal, it is casually revealed that Token's name is not Token. It has never been Token. His name is Tolkien, as in J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings. His father, Steve Black, was a fan of the books and named his son after the author. This would be unusual enough on its own. A retroactive name correction for a character who had existed for over 2 decades is already notable. But Parker and Stone did not stop there. Stan, in the episode, realizes that he has been the only person in his entire class who thought his friend's name was Token. Everyone else, Cartman, Kyle, the other kids, had apparently always known the name was Tolkien and understood its origin. Stan is confronted by his pediatrician, who breaks the fourth wall and looks directly into the camera, asking the audience whether anyone else had really thought that 2 black parents would name their child Token. The implication, delivered with deliberate aggression, is that if you thought the character's name was Token, you were making a racist assumption. You heard a name and interpreted it in the most derogatory available direction without questioning it. And then Parker and Stone went even further. They went back through the entire catalog of South Park episodes, 20-plus seasons worth of material, and changed every closed caption and subtitle reference from Token to Tolkien. They updated the character pages on the South Park Studios website. They changed every piece of promotional material they could access. They created what one writer accurately described as a synthetic Mandela effect. Viewers who distinctly remember the character being called a Token, because he absolutely was called Token for 20-plus years, found every textual record of that fact systematically revised. The show essentially told its audience, you misheard. You always misheard. His name was always Tolkien. The only evidence that it was ever Token is inside your own memory. And your memory, the episode implies, is shaped by racism that you may not have been fully aware of carrying. It is an extraordinary move. It is a retcon in the most literal sense, retroactively changing the canon, but it is also something stranger, because it retroactively changes the meaning of the joke the show had been making for 2 decades. The joke was always Token Black, a character who was the token black character in the show's world. Now, officially, the joke was always Tolkien Black, a character whose name honored a beloved fantasy author and whose majority white community could never quite get the name right. Both readings have been simultaneously true since the retcon. The show made fun of tokenism for 20 years using a character named Token. Then it changed that character's name to Tolkien and suggested that only racists had been reading it the wrong way all along. This is South Park operating at the level of pure conceptual audacity. They did not just acknowledge that the original name was a problem. They turned the acknowledgement of the problem into an elaborate joke that implicated the audience in the very thing being satirized. And they committed to it so completely, changing the record so thoroughly that the fake history they created became more textually present than the real history. There are continuity errors created by the retcon that the show has not resolved. The name Token appears in earlier episodes spelled out on screen, in handwriting, on signs and jacket patches and documents. Those physical inscriptions within the show's visual world still say Token. The closed captions say Tolkien. The character's own handwriting in episodes that predate the retcon contradicts the official record. Fans have noted this extensively. The show has not addressed it. This is either a deliberate joke about the impossibility of truly erasing history or an oversight. Given that this is South Park, I am inclined toward the former. The visible remnants of the old name, present in the actual animation, but absent from the textual record, create a visual contradiction that mirrors the actual situation. You cannot fully scrub the past. The record can be changed, but the evidence remains. Tolkien Black has continued to develop as a character since the Big Fix episode. He has more presence in the narrative. He has opinions about his own name and its origins. He reportedly hates J.R.R. Tolkien and resents being named after him, which is a joke that only works now that the retcon has been established. The mystery within all of this is whether the retcon represents a genuine course correction by Parker and Stone, an acknowledgement that the original name was a lazy and hurtful joke dressed up as satire, or whether it represents exactly the kind of move they have always made, turning criticism of themselves into a vehicle for another level of satirical commentary. The answer is probably both. South Park rarely operates on one level when it can operate on three. Section 8. Mysterion and the identity debate that consumed a fandom. Before the answer arrived, the question was very good. The character called Mysterion first appeared in Season 13, Episode 2, in March of 2009. The episode, called The Coon, introduced a South Park superhero mythology, with several of the town's children adopting superhero identities. Cartman's was the Coon. Others had various names and abilities, but Mysterion was different. But Mysterion was played seriously within the episode's internal logic. Where the Coon was clearly satirical, clearly Cartman being Cartman in a cape, Mysterion had a genuine sense of gravitas. The voice was distorted. The character's movements were depicted with something approaching real menace. And most importantly, the episode did not reveal who Mysterion was. The show's animation style, with its deliberately simple character designs, means that most of the South Park kids look fairly similar in silhouette. Without their specific clothing or voices, many of them are interchangeable. Mysterion's costume covered most of his face. His voice was altered. The physical proportions were consistent with several of the male children in Mr. Garrison's class. The show provided a few clues, including that Mysterion was someone Cartman had mentioned earlier in the episode, which narrowed the field somewhat, and that he had been seen at home by Kyle, which narrowed it further. But the final answer was genuinely ambiguous. Parker and Stone gave contradictory statements about whether they had decided on Mysterion's identity when the episode aired. Early interviews suggested the identity was undecided. Later, after the reveal, they said they had always known it was Kenny. This inconsistency is itself a small mystery, one the show created by being somewhat unreliable narrators about their own creative process. Fans analyzed the available footage frame by frame. They looked at movement patterns, body proportions, the specific nature of the voice distortion. They cataloged every possible candidate and assigned probabilities. And the debate ran across every major South Park fan forum for 18 months, generating thousands of posts and a genuine division of opinion. Kyle and Craig were considered the strongest alternate candidates before the answer arrived. Kenny was on the list, but was not the obvious favorite. When Mysterion Rises aired in November of 2010 and Kenny removed his mask, the reveal was played as though it should have been obvious all along. The episode includes a scene where Kenny unmasks himself in front of Stan and Kyle, and neither of them recognizes him, which is the episode's central joke about the character's erasure from memory. He takes off the mask. He is clearly Kenny. And they say, "Who are you?" The joke works because it comments on the way Kenny has been treated by the show's narrative for years. He dies and nobody remembers. He speaks and nobody understands. He removes his mask and his closest friends do not recognize him. Mysterion is, in the deepest sense, a superhero whose power is invisibility. Not chosen invisibility, but the invisibility of the poor kid, the invisible kid. The kid whose suffering is constantly happening and constantly forgotten by the people around him. The unsolved question that Mysterion leaves behind is about whether Kenny's growing self-awareness of his condition as expressed through the Coon and Friends trilogy, was ever fully integrated into his regular character in the main show. In those 3 episodes, Kenny was given more interior life than he had ever had before. He was articulate about his situation. He was frustrated. He was trying to understand something that could not be understood. And then the trilogy ended, and Kenny went back to being primarily a background character whose deaths had become infrequent. And the depth that had been given to him in those episodes was only intermittently referenced afterward. Did Kenny's experience as Mysterion change him in ways that persisted? Does the adult Kenny of post-COVID, the scientist who built his life around trying to fix the pandemic, carry the same existential weight that Mysterion carried? The show does not give clear answers to these questions. Kenny is one of those characters whose depth is available if you are looking for it, but is never pressed upon you. The show trusts you to carry what you understood from the Mysterion episodes into everything that comes after. The mystery of Mysterion's identity was one of the last truly successful fan engagement mysteries the show created. The Cartman's father mystery lasted too long and required too many years of patience. Mysterion was active for a year and a half, unresolved enough to generate genuine debate, resolved in a way that felt emotionally satisfying, rather than just technically correct. The reveal recontextualized the character. The reveal made the question worth having asked. Section 9, The Post-COVID Future. What Became of the Boys? From South Park. Let's take a long look at the future. When South Park premiered in 1997, it established something that would become one of the show's most characteristic features, and one of its strangest creative commitments. The children would not age. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny would remain perpetually 9 years old, or occasionally 10, caught in a temporal loop that bore no relationship to the passage of time in the real world. Years went by, a decade went by, 2 decades went by. The boys stayed children. Their voices changed slightly as their voice actors aged, but the characters themselves remained frozen in the 4th grade, cycling endlessly through school days and town crises without getting older. The post-COVID special, released in November of 2021, broke that commitment completely. Set 40 years in the future, in a world where the COVID-19 pandemic has finally ended, the special follows the grown-up versions of South Park's core characters as they reunite in their hometown following the death of Kenny McCormick. It is the first time the show had ever depicted the boys as adults in a serious, sustained way. And the version of adulthood it presents is simultaneously funny and genuinely dark. Stan Marsh, the character who most closely mirrors Trey Parker, has become a whittled-down, isolated figure. He works as an online whiskey consultant, which is as low-stakes and sad as it sounds. He lives with a sentient Alexa, a holographic artificial intelligence girlfriend, who nags him and controls his life. He has been estranged from his father, Randy, for decades, following a tragedy involving the Tegrity Farms marijuana operation, and the deaths of his mother and sister. Stan is someone who has been so thoroughly burned by the people he loved that he retreated from the world and its relationships as completely as possible, exchanging them for the frictionless but empty companionship of a device. That is a specific and pointed portrait of what happens when the optimistic, emotionally reactive kid at the center of 100 South Park adventures grows up without finding a way to process what those adventures cost him. The special does not linger on this. It moves quickly, but it is there, and it is unmistakable. Kyle Broflovsky became the guidance counselor at South Park Elementary. This is the adult version of what Kyle always was in the show, the conscience, the explainer, the one who tries to help people understand what they are doing and why it matters. He stayed in South Park. He stayed connected to the community. He is still trying to do good. And he is still being undermined by the people around him, primarily Cartman, who has converted to Judaism and become a rabbi with a wife and 3 children. A conversion that Kyle regards with deep and justified suspicion. Cartman as a rabbi is one of the funniest and most interesting character development choices the special makes. It is funny because of the obvious irony of the show's most virulent anti-Semite converting to the religion he spent his childhood attacking. But it is also interesting because as the special develops, it becomes clear that Cartman's conversion was at least partially motivated by self-interest. He converted because he fell in love with a Jewish woman, because the stability of family life appealed to him more than whatever chaotic path he had been on before, and because the structure of a religious identity gave him something to organize himself around. Whether the conversion is sincere or strategic is deliberately left unclear. Cartman has always been most dangerous when his selfishness aligns accidentally with something that looks like goodness. Kenny, of course, is the center of the special. He is dead before the episode begins. But what he became before dying illuminates something about what the show always believed about him, underneath all the orange parka jokes and the gruesome death gags. Kenny McCormick grew up to be a scientist, a celebrated millionaire scientist who dedicated his adult life to understanding and solving the COVID-19 pandemic. He built a lab. He developed theories. He tried to travel back in time to fix the origin of the disease. He was the boy from the trailer park, the boy nobody remembered, the boy who was always dying in the background of other people's stories, and he grew up to be someone trying to save the world. There is a tragedy in that which the special makes explicit. In a video he left behind for his friends to find after his death, Kenny blames the collapse of the future directly on Stan, Kyle, and Cartman. He says, with the kind of honesty that only becomes available when the person you are addressing is not in the room, that his 3 dickhead friends ruined everything by letting COVID break up their friendship and make them into combative, pessimistic, argumentative strangers. The pandemic was a test of whether people could hold on to each other. The boys, the specific boys who had defined his childhood and his identity, failed it. Kenny died trying to fix something his friends had broken by being their worst selves. That is not a funny premise. That is a genuinely sorrowful one. Unfiltered through the absurdist comedy of a show that hides its emotional gut punches inside fart jokes and Paramount Plus jokes and time travel mechanics. The mystery the post-COVID specials leave behind is significant. The second special, Return of COVID, resolved the immediate crisis by having the boys travel back and repair their friendship, using Randy Marsh's Tegrity Weed as a vehicle for reconciliation in a way that only makes sense if you have been watching the Randy storyline for years. Kenny was saved in that timeline. The catastrophic future was averted. But the question of what that future tells us about the show, what the adult versions of these characters represent about the arc of growing up in South Park and carrying all of that with you, remains something worth sitting with. The show spent 24 seasons with these children and 1 2-part special with their adult selves. The adult versions were specific enough and sufficiently thought through to feel like they had been considered for a long time. Stan's isolation, Kyle's persistent trying, Cartman's tactical sincerity, Kenny's world-saving ambition. These were not arbitrary character choices. They feel like Parker and Stone asking, if these children grew up into real adults, into the adults their experiences would produce, what would that look like? The answer was side-touching and funny, but mostly sad, and then, in the second special, it was fixed. The timeline changed. The friendship survived. The future was made better. Whether the better future is the canonical future, the one the show will eventually move toward in whatever final season or final story Parker and Stone eventually tell, is unknown. The show has not returned to the adult timeline in any substantive way since the 2 specials. The kids are children again. But that future exists now as a documented possibility, and it looms over the show in a way it never could before the specials aired. Section 10. Unsolved continuity mysteries and the plot holes that won't close. Every long-running show develops inconsistencies. The longer it runs, the more opportunity there is for contradictions to accumulate. South Park has been producing 22-minute episodes since 1997, often on a 6-day turnaround, with a small writing staff making real-time decisions about plots and characters and world-building. The surprise is not that the show has continuity errors. The surprise is how interesting some of those errors are when you look at them together. The most famous category of South Park continuity error is the kind the show was actually built on. The boys do not age, they remain perpetually in the 4th grade. But the world around them changes and grows and accumulates history. Stan was 10 years old in season 14 when a birthday episode briefly aged him up, only to reset. The show has never fully committed to addressing the question of why time passes and these children do not change. beyond the implicit logic of animation as a format where characters simply do not age unless the story requires them to. But within the frame of a world that otherwise has continuity, the agelessness becomes strange. Randy Marsh gets older, Mester. A Garrison has an entire decade-spanning character arc. The town changes. New families arrive, old ones disappear. The cultural landscape evolves across 28 seasons in ways that track closely with the real world. And four boys stand at a bus stop in the snow, year after year, exactly as they were in 1997. There are smaller continuity inconsistencies that are less about the fundamental logic of the show and more about specific things getting forgotten between seasons or even between episodes. Clyde Donovan's mother, for instance, was killed in the episode Lice Capades falling off a roller coaster. She was very clearly and definitively dead. And then she appeared again in later episodes, alive and unremarked upon, as if the death had not happened. The show never addressed this. She simply came back. One reading of this is that the show simply reset a character death it had not intended to make permanent. Another reading, more generous, is that South Park exists in a state of perpetual reset where death, unless narratively essential, can be undone by the simple passage of time. This is the universe that Kenny McCormick lives in. Death is not final unless the story needs it to be. Randy Marsh's profession shifted across the early seasons in ways that created inconsistencies. He was established as a geologist, the only scientist in South Park. But in other episodes, Tolkien's mother was described as a chemist, and Clyde's father was described at various points as both a geologist and as the owner of a shoe store. The world of South Park does not have a stable professional directory. But people's occupations shift based on what the episode requires. One of the most structurally significant continuity puzzles involves Clyde and the urinal deuce. In the episode of that name, Season 10's 9th episode, Mr. Mackey is trying to identify who defecated in a urinal at South Park Elementary. Clyde is initially suspected but is exonerated when it is revealed he had a colostomy and used a bag. This is very specific medical information about a recurring character, and then it was essentially forgotten. Clyde has not been consistently characterized as someone dealing with a colostomy in subsequent episodes. The medical detail appeared, served its narrative purpose, and was dropped back into the silence. The mystery of Butter's parents is a different kind of continuity puzzle. In Butter's very own episode, Season 5's finale, that Steven Stotch's latent bisexuality becomes a crisis, and in the aftermath, Linda Stotch attempts to drown Butters in a car. The family reconciles by the episode's end, and this deeply traumatic event is never substantively returned to. Butters goes on being the sweetest and most abused child in South Park. His parents remain relentlessly controlling and cruel to him in ways that verge on genuine child abuse. And the drowning incident sits in the canonical record as an event that happened and was then sealed off. Why has that particular horror never been properly revisited? Parker and Stone said in the commentary for the episode that they wanted to give Butters a proper introduction and backstory, which they succeeded in doing. But the weight of that backstory, the specific darkness of having a parent who tried to kill you, that is something the show treats with less gravity than it probably would if it were a different kind of show. Butters is too useful as an innocent. Making him a character explicitly shaped by the fact that his mother once tried to drown him would fundamentally change what he represents. So the show lets it exist. It happened. It is on record. And it is never quite acknowledged in the way it would need to be acknowledged if the show were really reckoning with it. That gap between what canonically occurred and what the show is willing to deal with emotionally is itself a kind of mystery. There is also the fascinating case of what happened to Pip Peerup. In the early seasons, Pip was a recurring character, the British kid at South Park Elementary based on the protagonist of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. While he was present in the first season, had a dedicated episode in Season 4 called Pip, and then very gradually faded from the show. He appeared in crowds. He had less and less dialogue. And then, in Season 14, an episode called 201 featured Pip getting killed by Mecha Streisand. It was presented as a real, permanent death, played with more finality than a Kenny death. Pip was simply gone after that. No mention, no continuation. Parker and Stone have never given a full explanation for why Pip was phased out before being killed permanently. The character did not work in the way they had hoped. He was too passive, too defined by his literary origins, too difficult to use in the show's increasingly topical and reactive format. Killing him formally was possibly a way of closing the door on a failed experiment, rather than just letting him drift into irrelevance. Pip's unanswered question is the simplest kind of mystery. He was there. He was pushed to the margins. He was killed. Why? Because the show stopped knowing what to do with him, probably. But the answer feels insufficient for a character who was present from the beginning and who deserved, one might argue, a little more than being erased by a giant robot, Barbra Streisand. Section 11. Fan theories that might actually be true. South Park has been generating fan theories since before fan theory culture became a recognized internet phenomenon. The combination of a show that clearly has real mythology, partial explanations, and deliberate mysteries, with a community of viewers dedicated enough to rewatch episodes multiple times and cross-reference details across decades of material, has produced an enormous body of speculative interpretation. Most fan theories are fun to consider and easy to dismiss. A few of them are hard to dismiss even after thinking carefully about the evidence. Let's talk about those. The first is about whether the events of South Park are happening as depicted or are being filtered through the imaginations of 4 children. This theory holds that the impossible things that happen in South Park, the alien invasions and satanic rituals and ancient curses and supernatural visitations, are not happening literally. They are the exaggerated, imaginatively inflated versions of real events as understood by 9-year-old boys. Kenny is not actually being killed and resurrected through Cthulhu magic. He is clumsy and accident-prone. The town keeps seeing him get hurt and keeps forgetting about it because children's attention is short and the community is used to him. The dramatic supernatural explanations the show provides for his deaths are the boys' way of processing a reality that is more mundane but no less confusing. This theory cannot be proven or disproven conclusively, and it probably makes the show less interesting if applied too rigorously. South Park's supernatural elements are genuinely funny because they are presented as real. If they are all filtered childhood perception, the joke changes significantly. But as a loose interpretive frame, the theory has value. It asks what these stories look like if the children are unreliable narrators. And the answer is that the show becomes a study in how imagination processes the world. A stronger and more specific theory concerns Cartman's consistent awareness of Kenny's deaths. We covered the eye transplant and the ash drinking elements earlier. The theory holds that these 2 events, Cartman receiving Kenny's eyes in Season 3 and then accidentally incorporating Kenny's soul through his ashes in Season 6, created an ongoing metaphysical connection that specifically grants Cartman the ability to remember deaths that others forget. The theory is supported by specific moments across multiple seasons where Cartman references Kenny's death patterns in ways that Stan and Kyle do not, and where the editing of the show appears to confirm that Cartman has an awareness others lack. Parker and Stone have never confirmed this, but they also have never contradicted it, and the pieces they provided fit together in a way that feels intentional rather than coincidental. The show built the mechanism and then never used it as an explicit plot point, leaving it available as implicit characterization. The third theory worth discussing is about the nature of South Park itself as a location, specifically whether the town occupies some kind of supernatural nexus that draws extraordinary events to it in a way that other towns do not experience. The evidence for this is cumulative. Over 28 seasons, the town of South Park has been visited by alien life, experienced mass supernatural events, been the site of repeated hell-adjacent occurrences, attracted attention from Satan himself on multiple occasions, been the target of alien rectal examinations, housed a community where at least one child is provably connected to Cthulian immortality magic, and regularly served as the epicenter of culture-defining events that ripple outward into the broader world. No other town in America appears to have this property. Denver, which is nearby, functions in the show as the boring normal world. Colorado more broadly is depicted as unremarkable. Only South Park has this density of extraordinary occurrence. The theory holds that this is not random or coincidental within the show's logic. that South Park is a specific place with specific properties that attract the impossible. Some fans have connected this to the alien visitors in the background of episodes, arguing that the consistent alien presence represents a surveillance operation, while monitoring a location that has been identified as anomalously active. The visitors are not there by accident. They keep coming back because South Park keeps producing events worth watching. This is speculative to the point of being nearly unfalsifiable, but it provides a framework for understanding why everything keeps happening in this particular small mountain town, and it treats the show's premise as internally coherent rather than as a joke that just happens to require a setting. A fourth theory, quieter and sadder than the others, concerns Butterscotch and the long-term psychological effects of his home life. The theory argues that Butter's increasingly erratic behavior in later seasons, his involvement in Professor Chaos schemes, his occasional flashes of surprising competence and manipulation, his gradual drift away from pure innocence towards something slightly darker, represents the realistic long-term effect of growing up in the Stotch household. His parents have grounded him for things he did not do, blamed him for disasters he was not responsible for, and in at least one incident, a parent attempted to kill him. The theory holds that Butters is slowly becoming less innocent, not because the writing staff wanted to develop him in that direction for reasons of creative interest, but because the show is depicting with genuine accuracy what extended abuse does to a child's personality over time. Whether this was intentional or emergent, whether Parker and Stone built this arc deliberately or stumbled into it through the logic of the character they created, is unknown. Butters was designed to be the show's eternal innocent, the pure soul who exists in contrast to Cartman's darkness. If he is slowly becoming more complicated, more capable of self-protection, more willing to use the tools that Cartman taught him, that might be exactly what the show intended. Or it might be the character developing beyond his original parameters in ways the creators are willing to honor. The theory is unprovable and possibly overthought, but it is the kind of theory that changes how you watch Butters, makes his sweetness feel a little more fragile, makes his goodness feel a little more earned. Section 12. The Randy Marsh Enigma. How a background character became the soul of the show. There is a mystery about Randy Marsh that rarely gets framed as a mystery, probably because it seems too obvious once you say it out loud. But it is worth sitting with for a few minutes, because the question raises has no satisfying answer. How did Stan Marsh's geologist father, a character introduced in the show's third episode as a moderately comic secondary adult, become the central protagonist of one of television's longest-running animated series? This was not the plan. When Randy Marsh appeared for the first time in the Season 1 episode Volcano, he was a supporting character, a functional adult who existed to ground the boy's story in some version of family life. He was voiced by Trey Parker, which is true of an enormous number of South Park characters since Parker and Stone do most of the voices between them. His personality in those early seasons was relatively stable. Geologist. Occasionally enthusiastic. Stan's dad. Normal in the specific way that South Park parents were normal in Season 1, which is to say not particularly interesting compared to the children at the center of the story. Then something started shifting. Randy began getting dedicated episode plots. He became funnier. His commitment to things, his tendency to throw himself completely into whatever his current obsession happened to be, emerged as the core of a comedic engine that turned out to have enormous range. He joined the local baseball team and got into brawls with other fathers. He attempted to set a world record for the largest bowel movement in human history. He became addicted to internet pornography during a period of rural isolation. He discovered that he was technically Lorde, the New Zealand pop star, and committed to the persona completely. Each of these episodes worked because Randy operated on a different set of constraints than the children did. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny were locked in a creative paradox. They could not age, and they could not fundamentally change. The best episodes starring them found ways to make their fixed personalities generate new friction, but the ceiling on character development was low. Randy had no such ceiling. As an adult, he could have a career crisis, a midlife obsession, a marriage falling apart, and being rebuilt. He could fail in ways that had lasting consequences within the same episode, and the next episode could either acknowledge those consequences or reset them depending on what the story required. Parker and Stone have said openly that their creative interests shifted as they aged. Now, the two men who made the show as college students in the 1990s were not the same people making it in their 40s. The things they found interesting had changed. Randy Marsh, as a character who was roughly their age and who was experiencing the particular absurdity of middle-aged male life, became the vessel for a different kind of South Park story. Less about transgression for its own sake, more about the specific comedy of an adult man who cannot stop being irresponsible, cannot stop prioritizing his enthusiasms over his family's well-being, and cannot fully account for the damage this causes even as he watches it happen. The Tegrity Farms era, beginning in season 22 in 2018, is where this transformation became total. Randy moved his family to a marijuana farm outside South Park against their wishes, but pursued his business with a single-mindedness that was increasingly hard to distinguish from genuine selfishness, and became the central character of a show that had been built around children. The season 23 introduction of a modified opening credits sequence, featuring Tegrity Farms instead of South Park, was the show's own self-aware acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted. Randy, in the early episodes of that season, even said directly in the show that he no longer cared about South Park, and that South Park was nothing without Tegrity Farms. That line was funny and also, in retrospect, a little uncomfortable, because it mirrored what some longtime fans were starting to feel about their relationship to the show. The boys had receded. The small Colorado town that gave the series its identity had receded. Randy and his farm and his weed business had expanded to fill the space. Whether this was a creative evolution or a show gradually losing the plot about what it was a matter of genuine debate. The mystery embedded in Randy's rise to prominence is partly autobiographical. Randy Marsh was always based on Trey Parker's father. His name, Randy, came from Parker's father's name. His profession as a geologist came from Parker's father's actual profession. The dynamic between Randy and Stan is the dynamic between Trey Parker and his real family, filtered through the show's comic lens. As Parker aged, as his own experience of fatherhood and middle age accumulated, the character closest to his own father, and by extension the character most useful for processing his own experience of adult life, naturally grew more interesting to him. But Randy is also a self-portrait. The specific quality that makes Randy funny, his absolute confidence in whatever he is currently doing, his inability to recognize the costs his enthusiasms impose on the people around him, his genuine love for his family existing alongside his consistent prioritization of his own projects over their needs, is recognizable to Parker as something he observes in himself. The integrity. Farm's subplot that ran across the Tegrity era was explicitly framed as Randy insisting he had integrity while doing things that had none, and the show's creator voicing a character satirizing his own worst tendencies through a marijuana farmer was about as honest as popular entertainment gets. The mystery that Randy Marsh leaves open, the one that has never quite been resolved, is whether the show understands how much damage the character causes, and whether that damage is meant to be seen as funny, as sad, or as both simultaneously. The post-COVID specials answer this in the most devastating way available. In that future timeline, Randy's refusal to close Tegrity Farms when his family needed him to did not just cause inconvenience. It caused the death of his daughter and the suicide of his wife. It estranged him from his son so completely that they spent 40 years barely speaking. Everything that was funny about Randy's relentlessness across the Tegrity years was revealed in the future timeline to have produced specific and irreversible tragedy. The show was keeping a ledger on Randy that only became visible when it showed you what the total looked like. That is a complicated thing to have done. If the audience laughed at Randy for years, he was one of the funniest characters in the show. And the show quietly accumulated the cost of those laughs until it could show you, in the most condensed and quiet way, what his behavior had actually produced. Shelley, locked in a barn. Sharon, gone. Stan, alone with a virtual girlfriend in a small apartment, unable to trust or connect. Whether Parker intended this as a complete critique of Randy, or as a commentary on himself, or as both, or as neither, is a question that has never been fully answered. The specials were partly undone by the time travel resolution of the second part. The future was changed. The damage was healed. But the healing was specifically accomplished by the boys reclaiming their friendship and using Randy's own product, Tegrity Weed, as a healing agent. Randy's creation. So the thing that broke his family was also the thing that fixed the timeline. The show gave him the cruelest kind of partial redemption, making his worst behavior the source of the solution, while never quite forgiving him for what it cost. Randy Marsh is the most interesting, unanswered question in South Park's late period. Not because his story is over, it clearly is not, and season 27 saw him selling Tegrity Farms and the family moving back to town, but because the shape of his arc, the rise and the damage and the partial redemption and the reset, mirrors the shape of the show itself. South Park pushed too far in one direction, realized it had damaged something, pulled back and tried to fix it while keeping most of the humor intact. Whether it worked is a mystery the show is still in the middle of answering. Section 13. The 6-Day Machine and the mysteries it creates. Before we close, there's one more mystery worth naming. Not a mystery about a character or a plotline, but a mystery about the show's creative process itself and what it produces. South Park has been made since season 4 in the year 2000 on a 6-day production schedule. 6 days from blank page to finished episode. The documentary that captured this process, 6 Days to Air, is one of the most honest portraits of the creative anxiety at the center of a long-running television show that has ever been filmed. Trey Parker pacing writer rooms at 2 in the morning. Animation being finalized while voice work is still being recorded. Episodes transmitted to Comedy Central just hours before they are scheduled to air. This schedule is the reason the show can respond to news events in real time in a way no other scripted series can match. It is the reason the China NBA episode aired the same week as the actual NBA China controversy. It is the reason the Steve Irwin costume joke appeared 8 weeks after Irwin's death rather than 8 months. The show runs on the same clock as the news cycle, and the specific quality of South Park, its freshness, its immediate relevance, its sense of having just emerged from the same reality you are watching it in, is inseparable from that schedule. But the 6-day schedule also creates a specific category of mystery. When you are working that fast, on that timeline, with that much pressure, you do not have time to carefully plan long arcs. But you do not have the space to think through all the implications of a creative choice you are making right now, for characters and stories that will still matter in 5 years. The show's mythology, its supernatural infrastructure, its character backstories, its long-term plot threads, all of it was constructed in real time, at high speed, by exhausted people trying to make something good enough to air on Wednesday. The result is that South Park's mysteries are sometimes genuine mysteries, and sometimes production accidents. The distinction is not always clear, even in retrospect. Did Parker and Stone know when they introduced the visitors in Season 1 that those aliens would still be appearing in the background of episodes 27 years later? Probably not. Not as a coherent plan. Not as a... Did they decide in Season 5 that Jack Tenorman would eventually be revealed as Cartman's biological father? Almost certainly not. Did they know when they named the token character that they would eventually perform one of the most elaborate retcons in television history by renaming him Tolkien? Definitely not, given the retcon did not happen until Season 25. Some of the show's deepest and most satisfying moments of mythology, the things that feel most planned and most inevitable in retrospect, emerged from a creative process that was working at a pace too fast for careful planning. Scott Tenorman Must Die was written as a standalone episode. The connection to Cartman's father was discovered later, retroactively, when Parker and Stone were looking back through their history for material to use in the 200th episode. The revelation that their best single episode was secretly connected to their oldest unresolved mystery came from looking backward, not forward. This means that the mysteries of South Park are a mix of things. Some were planted deliberately. Some were planted as seeds that grew in unexpected directions. Some were planted without any clear intention of ever returning to them. Some were never planted at all, emerging from the intersection of accumulated story and creative retrospection. The mystery created by this process is the meta-mystery. Which things were meant? Which things were accidents? Which questions were designed to generate years of fan speculation, and which are just things that happen to be unresolved because the show was too busy doing 6 days to air to resolve them? Nobody can answer this fully. Why, not even Parker and Stone could give you a complete accounting. The show was made too fast, for too many years, with too many moving parts, for any single person to hold the full map in their mind. The mythology of South Park, vast and strange and partially self-contradictory, is the accumulated product of thousands of days of creative sprint, each one trying to produce something good enough to survive Wednesday, with the long-term implications worked out, if they were worked out at all, after the fact. That is either a terrible way to make a show or the only honest way to make one. Parker and Stone seem to believe it is the only way. The terror of the blank page, the fear of not being funny, the commitment to immediacy over polish, has produced something that is genuinely alive in ways that more carefully constructed shows often are not. But it also means the show's mysteries are sometimes mysteries because nobody got around to resolving them. That is not a failure. It is a consequence of a particular relationship to time, one that prioritizes now over eventually and trusts that the audience will carry the questions between episodes because they care enough to ask them. The South Park fan who lies awake wondering what Mr. Hat actually was, or whether Kenny's mother is still alive somewhere in the future timeline, or whether Cartman ever truly understood that he had killed his own father, or whether the alien visitors have always been watching from a specific reason the show never explained, is participating in the show in the way the show was designed to be participated in. Not passively, not just as a viewer, but as someone whose imagination has been handed a partial picture and trusted to sit with it. The blank spaces are where the audience lives. The mysteries are the invitation. And South Park, across 28 seasons and over 300 episodes, and one White House press release condemning a cartoon made of construction paper, has never fully resolved the questions it started asking in 1997. That is not a flaw. That is the whole thing. Section 14. What the small mysteries tell us about the big ones. We have been traveling through the known and the half-known for a long time now. Let's take a moment to pull back and look at what all these mysteries, taken together, actually say. The photograph in the pilot, the aliens in the background, Mr. Hat's autonomous trips to Klan rallies, the father Cartman killed before he knew he had one. The immortality that came from cult meetings Kenny's parents have never fully explained. The name that was always Tolkien until it suddenly was. The future the boys almost had and the friendship that barely survived long enough to stop it. None of these mysteries are the same kind of thing. Some are in-jokes, some are production artifacts, some are the bones of abandoned storylines. Some are deliberate provocations designed to generate exactly the kind of conversation you are having with yourself right now, in whatever quiet place you inhabit. Some are accidents that became through the weird alchemy of an audience paying close attention over decades. Something that feels like it might have been intended. What they share is that they are all, in some way, an evidence of a creative process that runs faster than it can fully account for itself. South Park is a show that has always outpaced its own explanations. It generates material faster than it can process the implications of that material. The result, across 28 seasons, is a world that is thicker with unresolved threads than almost any long-running fictional universe you can name. Most of those threads are funny. Some of them are strange. A few of them are genuinely sad in ways that only become visible when you hold them in the light for long enough. The unresolved nature of South Park's mysteries is not a failure of storytelling. It is the show's essential character. A series that fully resolved all of its questions would be a different show. It would be a show that believed in its own completeness, and its own ability to make everything make sense. South Park has never believed that. It has always been suspicious of the idea that things make sense. The show's fundamental satirical impulse, that the world is absurd, that authority is usually wrong, that nothing is sacred, that the funniest possible response to any situation is the one that refuses to take it seriously, applies to the show itself as much as it applies to everything else. So the mysteries stay open. The photograph stays unexplained. The aliens keep watching from the margins. Kenny keeps coming back. Cartman carries the knowledge of what he did to his own father without ever quite acknowledging it directly. The Tolkien retcon rewrites the historical record while leaving the contradictory evidence visible in the frames. If you look closely enough, these are not loose ends. Now, they are the show's fingerprints, and there is something genuinely restful about that. about sitting with a story that does not require you to understand everything, that offers you partial answers, hints, fragments, clues that might not lead anywhere definitive, and trusts you to find value in the act of looking rather than in the satisfaction of finding. The best mysteries are not the ones that resolve cleanly into a single correct answer. They are the ones that deepen with every pass, that generate new questions as they answer old ones, that feel more alive the longer you spend with them. South Park, the weird construction paper cartoon that started as a Christmas card someone asked for as a favor and became a decades-long argument with American culture about what can and cannot be said out loud. It has produced more of those mysteries than any show of its kind. And it has produced them casually, almost accidentally, the way you scatter seeds by walking through a field rather than by deliberately planting. Most of those seeds are still growing in the dark. We do not know what all of them will eventually produce. We do not know which threads Parker and Stone will eventually pull, or which ones they will leave forever in the background, like a small gray alien watching from behind a bush in an episode about something else entirely. That uncertainty is part of what makes the show worth watching, worth rewatching, worth lying awake thinking about. And it is very much part of why you are here right now, in whatever quiet hour this finds you. Section 15, The Closing Mystery. Why South Park Keeps Mattering. We are near the end now. The light is low. The questions are mostly still open. Here's what I find most interesting about all of these mysteries taken together. They tell you something about what kind of show South Park has always been. A show that puts real photographs into its animated pilot without explanation, that hides aliens in the backgrounds of episodes for 28 years, that introduces a mystery about a child's parentage and takes 13 years to resolve it, that provides a partial explanation for a character's immortality, and then leaves the edges deliberately ragged, that tells you a character's name has always been Tolkien, and changes every record to match, while the old evidence remains in the frames, that kills a beloved character in a future timeline, and then undoes the future without fully resolving whether anything was fixed. A show like that is not interested in the comfort of complete resolution. It is interested in the particular pleasure of living with an open question. The South Park that emerged from a 5-minute construction paper Christmas card in 1995 and became one of the most commercially successful animated properties in television history did not become that by giving audiences what they expected. It became that by consistently refusing to be predictable, by finding the unexpected angle on every question, by treating its own audience as intelligent enough to handle ambiguity and strange enough to enjoy it. The mysteries of South Park are not failures of storytelling. They are features of it. The photograph that was never explained is not an oversight. It is a pilot episode that begins as the show itself begins with something slightly off, something that should not be there, something that asks you to look more carefully and find no satisfying answer at the end of your looking. Kenny McCormick has died more times than anyone has counted. He keeps coming back. He will keep coming back as long as the show exists. And the full explanation for why will always be a little bit incomplete, a little bit ragged at the edges, leaving room for the curious and the sleepless to turn the question over one more time in the dark. Cartman ate his father and wept for him years later without knowing why. The alien Greys keep watching from the margins of every episode. Mr. Hat attended a Klan rally without a human hand guiding him, and nobody ever explained how. The photograph of Matt Stone's sister watches from the picture frame in the very first house we ever entered in South Park, Colorado. And the town continues. The bus stop accumulates snow. 4 children wait for a bus that is always late, in a place where the impossible is always happening in the background, where everything is slightly wrong in ways that are very funny and occasionally very sad. This is South Park. Still going, still hiding things in plain sight, still refusing to give you the clean answer when the messy one is so much more interesting. Whatever time it is where you are, wherever you are in the world right now, I hope this was a good companion for it. I hope the mysteries are still turning over gently at the edges of your attention, the way South Park's best unanswered questions do. We will be back with more of this. Different shows, different worlds, different mysteries. If you want to be there for them, subscribe now. It takes 1 second, and it means a great deal. And if this episode gave you something, leave it in the comments. Tell me which mystery you keep coming back to. Tell me which theory you believe. Tell me what you think is hiding in the picture frame. I'll see you in the next one. Good night.